The audio on my first video, or my last video, didn't come out as well as I'd like, so I'm going to try this again and break this into two parts. What is Stoicism and how does it apply to software development? So in my introduction video, I said that this channel would be about exploring the intersection of software development and Stoic philosophy, but let's take a step back, and for the benefit of those unfamiliar with Stoicism, let's talk about the history of Stoicism and how I think it's relevant to the topics I'm going to be discussing, and also give a little preview of some of the topics I'll be going over in the future. So early schools of philosophy are generally categorized relative to Socrates. So you have your pre-Socratic schools and then your post-Socratic schools. Stoicism is one of several post-Socratic Hellenistic philosophies that originated in Greece and spread around the Mediterranean region, starting from the death of Socrates in 399 BC up until around, let's just say approximately the 2nd or 3rd centuries AD, when Christianity started to become much more widely spread, and in a lot of ways started to supplant these philosophic schools. Some of the major philosophic schools that you may recognize by their common English names without realizing that they're the names of philosophic schools, but I'm talking about skepticism and cynicism. Another major post-Socratic philosophy was Epicureanism, and that school in some ways contradicted Stoicism, but in other ways complemented Stoicism. That happened a lot with these schools, that they all kind of built on each other and, added color commentary to each other and, went off in different directions and explored different ideas. They influenced each other. They weren't entirely completely separate schools of thought. That's kind of how that worked. So let's focus on Stoicism. Stoicism was founded by Zeno of Citium in the 3rd century BC after he lost his life fortune in a shipwreck. And Stoics divided their principles into 3 main areas that they were concerned with. Logic, which was used to determine if your perceptions of the world were correct. So there's a lot of emphasis in Stoicism on clarity and perceptions and having those be the correct judgments of the world. Physics, used as a way to understand the natural world that could be figured out by reason. The Stoics believed that the world was rational and that you could apply reason to determine the nature of it. And then ethics, the 3rd area, involved the study of how to live one's life. Now, okay, this is an ancient philosophy. There's some weird stuff in there too. Okay, I don't believe all of it. I'd say that, my personal worldview today, you could call it a modern brand of Stoicism, a practical and pragmatic framework for navigating the world and making decisions that is grounded in naturalism. It's fully informed by modern science, and that it's inspired by the best practices and best principles from Stoicism and mindfulness, which I'll talk about in a second. And by the way, this is all aspirational for me. I would be more of a knee-high Stoic rather than a guru or a sage Stoic. Some well-known Stoic philosophers that you may recognize the names of are Seneca, Epictetus, and then the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who you may recognize from being featured prominently at the beginning of the movie Gladiator, which of course starred Russell Crowe as the main character Maximus. The part of Marcus Aurelius was played by the actor Richard Harris. Stoicism today is experiencing, I guess you could say it's experiencing a bit of a renaissance in the last few years, partly because of its close association with mindfulness meditation practices, which tends to get a lot of attention in Silicon Valley. you have apps like Headspace and different approaches that are being explored technology-wise around mindfulness. In fact, that's how I became interested in Stoicism. I was introduced to mindfulness meditation a few years ago, and in the course of learning more about that practice, I discovered and started to read more about Stoicism. A couple of popular authors today that feature Stoicism heavily in their writings are Ryan Holiday with his books The Obstacle is the Way, The Ego is the Enemy, his latest book, Stillness is the Key, and then a book that I use a lot and will be featuring in my upcoming videos, The Daily Stoic, which is co-authored by Stephen Hanselman. The Daily Stoic is similar in nature to, let's say, if you've ever read like a 365-day Bible, like a through the Bible in a year kind of concept. The Daily Stoic is divided up into, they cover different topics, different aspects of Stoicism, one small part at a time, divided up into 365 daily readings. I will be using the Daily Stoic as the basis for some of my future videos. So if you want to follow the channel regularly, you might want to pick up a copy of the Daily Stoic. Another author that uses Stoicism a lot that you've probably heard of is Tim Ferriss. He's the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, Tribe of Mentors, and several other books and podcasts. Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss, in large measure, you could say, are, have kind of driven this, renaissance of Stoicism over the last few years. As I said, Stoicism has a close association with mindfulness meditation. So if that interests you, then you might want to check out books like John Kabat-Zinn's book, Wherever You Go, There You Are, and Sam Harris's book, Waking Up, to name just a couple of books on the subject. There are tons and tons of books on mindfulness meditation at the bookstore. In fact, it can be a little bit overwhelming as to what books to focus on. Stoicism, by contrast, I think, aside from Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss, it's, as far as I can tell, not as well written about, partly because I think Stoicism tends to be misunderstood. It's thought of as a negative and pessimistic worldview that involves stuffing your emotions. These are stereotypes of Stoicism and are generally misunderstandings of Stoicism, and we'll be digging into a lot of that in future videos. So some of the practices of Stoicism that really resonate with me are negative visualization. This might be an area where Stoicism gets a bad rap. So the concept of negative visualization is that you imagine some future event that maybe concerns you, worries you, causes you anxiety, and you imagine it happening. And the reason why you do that is the idea is to remove the fear of it. So to be prepared for it and to remove the fear of it. The more you're prepared for it, then the lower your anxiety will be, because you can handle it if it happens. Practicing poverty is another one that's similar to that. So the idea of practicing poverty is that you deny yourself, at least temporarily, the modern day creature comforts of America, eating meager food and dressing meagerly, and that kind of thing. And there again, the idea, as I see it, is to reassure yourself that no matter what happens in your career, economically, your latest venture like I'm doing, whether you become a hugely successful multi-billionaire or whether that doesn't happen, that you're gonna be okay. Like, if you really think about it, just to get your basic physical needs met, it doesn't really require all that much. And so you're trying to reassure yourself that you're going to be okay. We'll be talking specifically about some of those practices in future videos. Self-reflection and journaling is another practice. They really encourage a daily practice of reflecting at the end of every day. I'll be talking about my journaling practices and some ideas I have for what I want to do with my journaling. Examining and letting go of your attachments. This is another thing. For me, you know, that meant like letting go of youthful desires for exotic cars and mansions and, you know, over-the-top material excesses, as well as letting go of ego-based attachments, like, for example, you know, expecting rose petals to be thrown at my feet at work and that kind of thing. It's a work. This all is a work in progress for me, but you know, I think I have made some gains in those areas over the last few years. And practicing acceptance is another area of Stoic practice. So the idea is learning to accept the present situation as it currently is and not as we would have it to be. So those are kind of some of the fundamentals of Stoicism, and in the next video I'll talk about how I see that applying and using those tools as life as a software developer.